I learned the real value of natural fertilizer the slow way. The way most lessons arrive when you've lived long enough to stop rushing. It began one quiet spring morning when I stood in my kitchen, coffee cooling beside the sink, looking at a small bowl of scraps I'd gathered without thinking. Eggshells from breakfast, a banana peel curling in on itself, coffee grounds still warm and smelling rich and bitter. I remember smiling to myself, because it suddenly struck me that everything in that bowl had already done its job once, and yet it wasn't finished, just like us. We're told so often that usefulness fades with time, but the garden never believes that. The garden teaches that nothing is wasted unless we choose to waste it. I carried that bowl outside and knelt beside my tired tomato bed, the soil dry and pale from last season. Years ago, I would have driven to the store and bought a bright bag promising miracles. Instead, I crushed the eggshells slowly in my hands, listening to the soft crackle, thinking about calcium and strong cell walls, about how plants, like bones, need quiet strength more than flashy speed. I learned to rinse shells first, let them dry, then grind them fine so they return gently to the soil. Big chunks take too long. Patience matters, but preparation helps. I buried them shallowly, not deep, because roots feed near the surface. That small detail made a difference I could see later. The coffee grounds came next. Once I feared they were too acidic, until I learned that used grounds are mild, almost neutral, and loved by worms. I spread them thin, never in thick mats, because soil needs to breathe. That was a lesson learned the hard way one damp year when mold showed up like an uninvited guest. Thin layers, I remind myself now, are like good conversations. Space between words lets meaning sink in. Coffee grounds darken the soil, hold moisture, and invite life underground. When the worms arrive, everything else follows. The banana peel I chopped small with an old kitchen knife. Whole peels rot slowly and attract the wrong kind of attention, but chopped pieces disappear quietly, feeding potassium back into the earth. Potassium, I've learned, is about balance, water movement, flower strength, resilience. Isn't that what we're all seeking as we age? I always bury peels a few inches down and cover them well. The garden prefers discretion. I sometimes dry peels on a tray by the window, then crumble them later. It feels almost ceremonial, turning yesterday's lunch into tomorrow's harvest. Over time, my confidence grew, and so did my list of homegrown helpers. A jar of water becomes fertilizer when I soak onion skins in it overnight, creating a golden tea full of trace minerals. I dilute it, always dilute it. Nature favors moderation, and pour it at the base of leafy plants. Another jar holds water from boiling vegetables, cooled first, because heat harms soil life. Nothing salted, ever. Salt is the one thing the garden does not forgive easily. What surprised me most was how these simple habits changed my relationship with the garden. Feeding the soil from my own kitchen made me attentive. I noticed smells, textures, timing. I learned to watch the leaves instead of the calendar. Pale leaves asked for nitrogen. Slow flowering hinted at missing potassium. Brittle growth whispered of calcium. The garden spoke softly, but clearly, once I slowed down enough to listen. I no longer think of natural fertilizer as a trick or a shortcut. It's a conversation between home and earth, between what we take and what we return. Every time I step outside with a small bowl of scraps, I feel a quiet satisfaction, the kind that doesn't need applause. The soil grows darker, softer, alive again, and in that transformation I see a reflection of myself, still useful, still learning, still capable of nourishing something new. By midsummer, the garden had changed in ways that were subtle unless you'd been watching closely. The way you notice a friend's health improving not by one dramatic moment, but by a steadier walk, a brighter eye. The soil no longer crusted over after watering. When I pressed my fingers into it, it yielded easily, cool and crumbly, smelling faintly sweet instead of dusty. That smell became my favorite signal. It told me life was busy below the surface, doing the quiet work no bottle or bag can ever fully replace. That was when I began experimenting a little more, still with nothing fancy, only what passed through my hands each day. Rice water came first. I'd grown up watching my mother rinse rice before cooking, the cloudy water swirling down the drain without a thought. Now I saved it, the first rinse only, full of starch. I let it sit for a few hours, sometimes overnight, until it took on a faintly sour, alive scent. Diluted well, always diluted, it became a gentle tonic for the soil. I never poured it on leaves. Roots are where real conversations happen. Within days, I noticed more earthworms after watering, their small movements like punctuation marks in the soil, proof that I'd fed the right mouths. Eggshells and banana peels were only the beginning. Vegetable scraps taught me restraint. I learned quickly that more is not better. Too much fresh material overwhelms the soil, just as too much advice overwhelms a tired mind. Everything in moderation, spaced out over time. I chopped scraps small, buried them shallowly, and rotated where I fed, letting one area rest while another received attention. The garden responded the way people do when they feel respected. Not rushed, not forced. One afternoon, I stood with a neighbor who couldn't understand why I bothered. "Fertilizer's cheap," he said, shrugging. I nodded because he wasn't wrong. But cheap doesn't always mean wise. I tried to explain that what I was feeding wasn't just plants, but the system that holds them. Soil remembers kindness. It remembers neglect, too. Years ago, I had treated it like a storage unit. Dump nutrients in, take harvest out. Now, I treated it like a relationship. And relationships, I've learned, improve when you show up regularly with small, thoughtful gestures. I started saving water in new ways as well. The water left after steaming vegetables, once cooled and unsalted, went straight to the beds. It carried trace minerals and a little warmth, like a reassuring hand on the soil's shoulder. Even aquarium water from a friend's fish tank found a place in my routine. Diluted and shared sparingly, rich with nitrogen from a living system that had already balanced itself. What surprised me most was how this practice changed my days. Feeding the garden became less of a chore and more of a rhythm. Morning coffee meant future soil. Dinner prep meant tomorrow's nourishment. Waste stopped feeling like waste. It felt like transition. I noticed I moved differently too. Slower, steadier, more deliberate. There's a dignity in doing things by hand when no one is watching, in trusting that results will come even if they don't arrive on schedule. By late summer, the harvest spoke for itself. Tomatoes were firm and deeply flavored, not watery. Peppers held their shine longer on the vine. Even tired plants seemed to recover faster after heat waves. I didn't credit myself. I credited the soil, finally given the tools to care for what grew within it. Standing there one evening, hands stained dark with earth, I understood something that had taken me decades to learn. Nourishment is rarely about adding something new. More often, it's about returning what was always meant to go back. By early autumn, the garden no longer felt like something I managed. It felt like something I participated in. The rush I once carried, counting yields, comparing sizes, worrying whether I was doing enough, had quietly slipped away. In its place was a steadier understanding. The garden didn't need constant correction, only consistent care. I noticed that when I missed a week, nothing collapsed. The soil held on. The plants adjusted. That was the real proof that the system underneath was working. I began to prepare for winter the same way I'd learned to garden, using what I already had. Fallen leaves were no longer yard waste, but insulation. I shredded them lightly and spread them over the beds, not thick enough to smother, just enough to protect. Under that blanket, the soil stayed warmer, alive longer. I tucked in the last of the kitchen scraps before the ground cooled too much, knowing decomposition would slow but not stop. Life rarely stops completely. It simply changes pace. On colder mornings when the garden rested, I found myself reflecting more than working. I thought about how many years I had believed improvement came from adding. More fertilizer, more effort, more control. Age has taught me something gentler. Improvement often comes from subtraction. Less waste, less force, less hurry. The natural fertilizers I used weren't just cheaper or safer, they required me to pay attention. They asked me to observe timing, texture, smell, response. They made me present. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing my garden wasn't dependent on supply chains or instructions printed in fine type. If my hands could cook a meal, they could feed the soil. If my home produced scraps, the garden could transform them. It felt resilient, the way people become resilient when they learn to rely on skills instead of shortcuts. One evening, after the first frost kissed the edges of the beds, I stood there longer than usual. The plants were slowing, but the soil beneath them was richer than it had been in years. I realized the harvest I valued most wasn't what I carried into the kitchen. It was what stayed behind. Darker earth, more worms, better structure. A foundation that would serve whatever came next. Natural fertilizer, I've learned, isn't really about nutrients. It's about closing loops. It's about respect for the food we eat, the land we tend, and the stage of life we're in. Nothing in the garden asks you to be young or strong or fast. It asks you to be attentive, to return what you can, to trust that small, steady actions matter. As I turned back toward the house, hands empty but heart full, I knew this practice would stay with me. Not because it was clever, but because it was honest. And honesty, like good soil, only gets better with time.